I'm Jill Fonda Allen. I'm glad to introduce, actually very excited to introduce my friend and fellow orchid enthusiast, Dr. Clark Riley. Dr. Riley goes far beyond enthusiasm, though he has plenty of that. He's really an orchid expert. He's an expert grower. He's a past president of and lifetime member of the Maryland Orchid Society. You can see our shirts. And he's on the American Orchid Society Speakers Bureau. Many of his plants have been awarded, and I know he's gotten some personal awards for his own involvement. And he provides encouragement and advice in person to our members and on his website. And he can always be counted on to help us set up an amazing orchid display or to perform as our auctioneer in plant sales or to tell an engaging story. So it's very timely that he's speaking to us in late March when our native orchids are about to appear and maybe sort of started. And I am certain that Dr. Riley is going to inform and inspire and entertain you. So, Dr. Riley.
Thank you. I am thrilled to be here. My whole life has been around departments of agriculture. So I really like it. My father was a county agent in northern Kentucky. When I was little, I made a complete collection of all the agricultural bulletins in his office, and I still have them to this day. My niece is an employee of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. She's currently on the cheese desk. So she is promoting American cheese and helping to inspect foreign cheese as it comes in. Now, I've been growing orchids for a long time. Next April will be a particular anniversary for me because the first orchid I started with and been growing continuously since was in April of 1957. So next year will be 70 years that I've been growing orchids, and I still love them. Now, we're going to be talking about orchids tonight, and it is the second largest of all the plant families, the largest being the daisies. And despite it being such a large family, it is nowhere the major flora. It's always part of the flora. Orchids are found on every continent except for Antarctica. And the Arctic winds prevent the seeds from going across there. So at this point, we've never found one there. Now, you're going to be learning a lot of little details about orchids, and they're kind of among the most human of the plant families. They like to lie, cheat, and steal, okay? But they have fascinated a lot of people. The only family of either plants or animals to which Darwin devoted an entire book were the orchids. The book is the various contrivances by which orchids are pollinated. He was fascinated by them. So we're going to be seeing a lot of little details about it. And there's a lot of ties into this room here. We got 4 members of the Maryland Orchid Society infiltrating this group here tonight. You know who you are. And we are very active. We have monthly meetings. Our website is marylandorchids.org, so we're easy to find. Our meetings are not too far away, and we have a number of the members from right out here who come to that monthly meeting. We have an annual show. We participate in other shows, so we keep it going. Now, most orchid growers grow what are called epiphytic orchids, tropical epiphytic orchids. Epiphytic orchids are those that grow on other plants, on phytic plants. So the cattleyas and the vandas and the phalaenopsis, they're all tropical orchids that grow on trees. All of the Maryland orchids are terrestrials. They grow in the soil, and some of them have some very unusual things. Everything I'm going to show you tonight occurs in Maryland. Some of the pictures are mine, some I've gotten from other places, some are ones that I grow, some are from Kentucky and other places that I have lived and visited. But any habitat in Maryland that's not too badly disturbed can host orchids. And many of them are not what most gardeners would recognize as, something of interest. They are to humans small, green, and insignificant, but to an insect, they're very important. Okay, so this is a typical habitat. You can look at the plants in it there in the plant communities, and that will tell you what sort of orchids to expect there. This is a blueberry barren here, and so you could expect it to be acid-loving orchids. Okay, now we have a lot of people who spend a lot of time studying the orchids. This is a terrestrial one here. This is a white fringed orchid. We'll be seeing a little bit of them more later, but they're fascinating. Orchids have all these very specialized features that link them to certain insects and certain habitats and everything. We'll talk about them. We'll start with the one that I started with. Okay, again, almost 70 years ago, I bought a large yellow lady slipper plant from a wildflower, or from not, it wasn't even a wildflower nursery, it was a flower nursery. And I was 6 years old. So I potted it up in dirt from the playground and put it in a clay pot in the west window of our apartment. You can guess that within about 2 months, it had died, but not before blooming and cementing my love of orchids that has carried me through now 3/4 of a century. The yellow lady slipper is a particularly good example to give. It is locally abundant in Maryland. There are places where it's fairly common, and it is probably the easiest of all of the native orchids to grow. Okay, when we moved here from Chicago, I got 3 rhizomes from a wildflower nursery in Wisconsin and planted them in our yard in Baltimore. And those 3 have now grown into over 150 stems in bloom every year. So this is one that will grow in home conditions and is one that does well in the wild as long as it's not picked, because when you pick it, it tends to pull up the whole plant, and that's the end of it. Now, again, lie, cheat, and steal. Okay, how the whole point of the blooms of the orchids is to get pollinated so that there will be more of these orchids later on. And the lady slippers, which are the ones that you probably may be the most familiar with, have a kind of a trap for the insects. They're not carnivorous. They don't eat the insect, but they got that pouch with that opening on top. And the opening there has these infolded margins that have wax on them, so they're slippery. And the insect falls in. Okay, now once the insect is in, it's got to find its way out. Now, here's the thing. Insects are the most abundant life form on Earth. They outweigh us by quite a margin. But as you'll see, they're not really all that smart in the intellectual way. And it's sort of, their success kind of calls into question the survival value of intelligence. Okay, well, what the lady slipper does is it helps the insect, because hopefully the insect has on its back a mass of pollen from another yellow lady slipper flower. And so the object is to get it onto the stigmatic surface, the female surface of the flower. And so it has fallen down in here. So the flower helps it. It's got dotted lines. Just follow the dotted lines and you can get out, okay? And there, so it's got that, but if it hasn't figured that out, there are these little kind of translucent windows on the back that are sort of like skylights, sort of like the exits signs that you see here. And if it still hasn't got the message, it's got a little ladder of hairs that will get it out past the outside here. So here's the stigmatic surface. The pollen on its back gets scraped off into the stigmatic surface, and then it picks up a new pollen mass on its way out, thereby ensuring, very important, cross-pollination. That's part of what gives it survival value. The pollen will sprout on the stigmatic surface. The pollen tubes will come down here, and they will fertilize the ovum. You get seeds, and you will get more orchids, hopefully. Okay, this is the most common lady slipper in North America, and it is one that's particularly abundant in Maryland. You will find it all over the state, and in particular, If you go up on Mother's Day, up into the Catoctons, into Gambrel State Park, and take one of the ridge trails off to each side of that ridge trail, you will find at least 10,000 pink lady slippers in bloom. Don't try to transplant them unless you're willing to put up with their needs, though, because even though they are the most common of our lady slippers, they're very demanding in their culture. When I give orchid talks, a lot of times I will start off with, all orchids are easy to grow. Everyone says, are we paying him for this? Okay. And then the second part is, if you give them what they want. Okay, in the case of the pink lady slipper, they want really acidic conditions. They want sterile acidic conditions. If you water them with tap water, they will die. If you give them fertilizer, they will die. The only people who have successfully cultivated them grow them in rotting pine logs or peat and sand mixture with a top dressing of pine needles, and water them on occasion with rainwater or distilled water, to which they've added a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar. That acidic. Okay. If you do that, they'll grow, but you got to keep it up. Okay. Now, does this look familiar? There's this fantastic scientist named Doug Gill, right there. And he talked at this conference we had on the cultivation and propagation of hardy terrestrial orchids a frighteningly large number of years ago, where we gathered all of the people who knew a little bit about growing terrestrial hardy orchids from seed, and we gathered them together, and it spawned interest in it that has now gone commercial. When we had that conference, there were only, now I know this group is not all that interested in hybrids in general, I'm told, but just so you know levels of interest here, at the time of that conference, there were only 2 hybrids ever made of the lady slippers, the Cypripediums. Now there are over 400 hybrids have been made, and they are a commercial crop, which you can get from nurseries of genuinely propagated plants, both species and hybrids. But what Doug had found out, he walked in the woods and he was looking at the survival of the orchids and everything, and he noticed that they would disappear. Okay, but then he would come back a couple of years later, it was back. Okay, that's it. And he marked the places with aluminum foil so that he could find them easily and everything, and found that in rough years they would just stay dormant. They would just stay underground for a couple of years before they would come back up and everything. And he did some mathematical calculations. I'm going to butcher your talk here, but hopefully I've got the gist of it. And he was able to mathematically back calculate to how old these plants were. Some of these plants were hundreds of years old. Okay. But weird thing is they almost never set seed. Okay, well, how can you have all of this abundant plants which never set seed? And he studied it for a number of years. And then one year, they were setting seed all over the range. Whoa, what's this? And he was walking there and looked up. It was the year of the gypsy moths. And the gypsy moths had stripped the foliage cover over there, and they were getting light, perhaps for the first time in 40, 50 years. Okay. Well, that's weird. If they wanted the light, why were they here in the forest? Well, it went back in the records to when these things would have sprouted. And what were those lands when they sprouted? Well, these were blueberry burns, places like that. The Native Americans had used fire as a tool to burn off the trees and shrubs and things like that so that the blueberries would grow, so they would have the food for it. And these were not really forest orchids. These were meadow orchids and wild. If you go up into Canada, up around Lake Superior, you will find meadows. See, we don't have meadows in the U.S. except a few that we've rebuilt. We have pastures. Now, pasture is not a meadow. And so up in New England, I have seen meadows where there were 1,000 of them in just a view like this of the pink lady slipper. And there they get pollinated, there they reproduce. So it's an interesting thing. You gotta study them to find out why they do what they do. Okay, so we have in Maryland, we have the yellow lady slipper, the large yellow lady slipper. We have the pink lady slipper, and we have up in the highlands of Maryland, up in the cranberry bogs, occasionally you'll find the showy lady slipper. The showy lady slipper likes it much further up north in general. This is the only orchid which is a state flower. The showy lady slipper, Cypripedium reginae, is the state flower of Minnesota. And one of the major propagators of native orchids from seed commercially lives in Bouvet, Minnesota, up around Duluth, where it gets really, really cold. And one of the things that he does is to produce thousands and thousands of showy lady slippers for the trade. We also have in Maryland the white lady slipper, the small white lady slipper, Cypripedium candidum. There are a few colonies of it known in Washington County, and it is on protected land protected by the Nature Conservancy. This is one that prefers to be out on the prairie, out in Illinois, in the prairie preserves they have there. This grows in amongst the grasses, but they have an annual burn out there, and it's a big community thing when they have the burn, and it keeps the shrubs and everything else from shading them out. This is one that can be grown in cultivation. It's been used in hybrids. It is known to be okay. There's one that we might have here in Maryland. I know it goes into Virginia and is hard enough to be here. This is the Kentucky lady slipper, Cypripedium kentuckiensis. It is the largest flower of the North American lady slippers. The pouch can be the size of a small hen's egg. Okay, those were the lady slippers. Those are the ones that I've always been fondest of, and I grow a lot of them at home, and I've been studying them for a long, long time, 70 years, older than some of you have been around. But another rather common one, if you go out into grassy areas, boggy areas, uplands, drylands, lots of different things, are the ladies' tresses or spiranthes. Now, the spiranthes gets its name spiral from the way that the flowers are presented. They go in a corkscrew around the stem, and they'll have a whole lot of blossoms on the flower stem. The Japanese name for them is the corkscrew flower. So that's what they do here. Now, this is a picture of some spiranthes that I took when we were camping out on Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. And this is a campground that got mowed about every month and a half. So the spiranthes has to send up its flower spike, bloom, get pollinated, set seed, and distribute seeds between mowings. And they were all over the campground, so they could do it. It's orchids, when they want to, they can survive. The spiranthes are one of the most common orchids that you can get in garden centers. Okay, there's one particular clone of Spiranthes odorata called Chad's Ford. It comes from Chad's Ford, Pennsylvania, and it turns out to be very amenable to cultivation. If you have a bog garden or a water garden with a margin on it and everything, this will grow and it will reproduce quite well. This is in a local nursery, and these are all potted up and everything. They have several thousands of them for sale. Spiranthes odorata, Chad's Ford. It is a native, and it does very well with humans. These are the individual flowers. Now, these individual flowers are just a little bit larger than a pinhead in some cases. So this is a close-up, but it gives you an idea of just the intricacy. The idea is that a tiny insect, probably a midge or something that bites you when you're out in the area, will crawl in there to get the nectar at the base, and in the process gets that pollen on its back and leaves another pollen mass behind. Some of them are quite attractive if you got a good magnifying glass. But again, this spiral effect. Almost all of them are in shades of white, green, and yellow, the same color scheme as snowdrops. There is a Chinese species that has pink in it, but not in any of the native US ones. Okay, this is a very common one. If you all do a lot of tramping around the woods here, particularly if you go up in the gunpowder, the forests surrounding the gunpowder area, you will likely encounter thousands of the showy orchids. Okay, it used to be in the genus Orchids. Taxonomists do violent things to the names of plants and everything, and some of us are resistant, others are acquiesce. But the showy orchis is very common in the gunpowder drainage area. It is a bear to transplant and to grow. Okay. To the best of my knowledge, no one has propagated from seed to flower in cultivation, even though it's quite common. I took a hike up along one of the trails in the Great Smoky Mountains and must have seen 5,000 of them and everything. But you see very few of them in gardens. Leave them where they are, protect the areas where they live. Now, anytime that you have in nature an abundant flower in the pink ranges, you will also have the white ones, the albas. This is in the pigment schemes, the pink pigment, the anthocyanin, is not essential for survival. Okay, it's used to attract pollinators and things like that, but the flower can live without it. So anytime you have a pink flower in abundance, you can sometimes find white varieties. And horticulturally, these are very desirable. Okay, these are one of the favorite natives, and this is one that actually grows pretty well in cultivation if you have a bog garden, and that's the yellow fringed orchid, Platanthera ciliaris. It's quite stately. It can grow up to this tall and is readily propagated. We have several nurseries here in the region who grow them in their boggy gardens, and the plants that they sell are those that have sprouted spontaneously around in other pots. So they'll propagate on their own as there. But it's a very attractive genus. We have here fringed orchids native to North America, a whole range of them here, all these different colors. They are among the most amenable to cultivation. And if you preserve their habitats, or if you have a disturbed but not destroyed habitat, they will sprout. In eastern Kentucky, along the coal roads, where you've got seeps along it, and the Department of Transportation from time to time plows the road edge, the fringed orchids will come in within a year or two, and you will find thousands of the yellow fringed orchids right along the roadside in the seeps. So that's a fairly abundant one, and one that you will find in a lot of places, from sea level along the sandy swales close to the coast, all the way up into the mountains, from southern Florida all the way up into northern Newfoundland. So this one has a wide range and is very attractive. Okay, this is one that may still be around somewhere in Maryland. Doug and I were talking about how sometimes a plant will spontaneously reappear in an area once you get the habitat right again. This one is, as best we can tell, is extinct in the wild in Maryland. It's many records of it having been found here, but they are not found in the wild. This is one that though does lend itself well to cultivation. Here in Maryland, we've got the Carnivorous Plant Nursery. Some of you may have heard of the Carnivorous Plant Nursery. It's out in Smithville. They specialize in carnivorous plants, but he has a whole section of his inventory devoted to wild native orchids. And the purple fringed orchid is one of the ones that he offers every few years. And these are nursery propagated plants. He is one of the few reliable sources of nursery propagated pink lady slippers, for instance. Okay, so he has orchids as well as pitcher plants, sundews, Venus flytraps, nepenthes, and so forth. The Platantheras, the fringed orchids, grow in a variety of habitats, from wide open dawn to dusk full sun bogs into light forests. This is one of the forms of the purple fringed orchid. It grows in the woodlands. You have, this is a fairly common one in open areas that are marshy. The white-fringed orchid, Platanthera blefara glottis, and it can colonize very quickly in a disturbed area if the conditions are right and it doesn't get mowed or sprayed with herbicides. The white-fringed orchid will form natural hybrids with the yellow-fringed orchid if the two of them occur together, because the pollinator for one also will be the pollinator for the other, and you can get some mixture and a whole range of colors from the white through the lemon yellows all the way to the deep orange of the two species. This is an endangered species here. This is, rain is freezing on it here. It's the eastern white-fringed orchid. And it is found in a few isolated prairie type locations, and it's been one that has been studied a lot by some of the research members of the American Orchid Society for finding ways of increasing its numbers. And ways that are very important are excluding deer and then helping to encourage the pollinators necessary for the white-fringed orchid. It's a very attractive species, quite tall, and a beautiful color. And it's dependent upon humans not destroying the habitat right now. So that's a precarious position to be in. Okay, one of my favorite orchids after the lady slippers is the grass pink or the calopogon. These occur in sandy, boggy areas from Florida all the way up into northern Newfoundland. And this is one of the fastest growing, easiest to grow terrestrial orchids if you give it a bog habitat. And it will, okay, orchid seed is different than most other plant seeds in that they do not have any of the seed food attached to them. There's just a ball of a few cells inside a fluffy seed coat to allow for wind distribution. And they'll travel a long way on the wind. Now, in the wild, only 1 in a million of those seeds is going to find a suitable place to grow. Sometimes in association with a fungus, though, that's somewhat controversial. They may or may not be as important as people think. In the case of the grass pinks, they don't need fungus to grow. They just need the right place to land, which would be a sandy, boggy area. In the commercial, in the hobby, we use basically tissue culture methods to propagate the seed. We'll take the seed, we'll surface sterilize the seed to eliminate funguses and molds that might be associated with it, or we will take the pod and sterilize the outside and then open it up under sterile conditions and grow it in laboratory conditions with a nutrient media. And then we get almost 100% yield. Instead of 1 in a million, we get 1 in 1. And the grass pink is a particularly good one for that. It will bloom from seed in about 3 years. And that's quite fast as orchids go. I gave a talk, it was back in 1981 to a group in Michigan. And I talked about the prospects of commercially growing these native orchids and everything. And someone in the crowd thought that was a good idea. And he set up on his farm to do it. And he did it. And one of the ones that he propagated in large quantities was the grass pink. And he had whole beds of them that he had grown from seed using the tissue culture techniques and grew many, many thousands of them. So I'm glad that it wasn't too ridiculous of a talk, because I would have been very sad if it had failed. But here's a boggy area, and they're very, very beautiful. I remember an article in National Geographic a long time ago where the author was visiting these islands off of Newfoundland, Saint Pierre and Miquelon. They're actually French islands off of the coast of Newfoundland. And all along the beach there, just inside the beach, where it was still wet and cool, there were thousands of these, and they had bouquets of them and on their table for dinner. So it is a beautiful one, and it's one that lends itself to gardening if you give it bog conditions. If you can grow pitcher plants, you can grow this. Anytime you find a purple, you'll occasionally find a white, and it is a very beautiful one. These are offered by sale every year from Carnivorous Plant Nursery. Another one that's relatively easy to grow is the rose begonia. Okay, in the taxonomy of orchids and how they've studied the branching and how they've evolved and everything, one of the closest relatives of this is vanilla. Okay, vanilla is the only orchid that you routinely eat. And the rose begonia is in that same family. And the way that it works, it's another bog orchid, and it's a relatively easy one to grow. But if you have a nice peaty, sandy, wet place that's acidic, it has these wiry stems that go through the peat, and every so often a stem will pop up with one of these flowers and everything. And I got a little packet of the roots from Carnivorous Plant Nursery about 10 years ago, and it's covered a whole portion of my bog garden now. So this is another one that's easy to grow. And it's quite attractive. Just keep in mind that we're talking about attractive at this scale. So you're not going to be wearing it as a corsage or anything. Okay. Most people in here, raise your hand if you've seen this on walks. Yeah, okay, good. Okay, this is one of the things about our native orchids is that most of them we know with common names. Okay, in the epiphytic orchids that we have on the table, on the show table at the Maryland Orchid Society meetings, almost none of them have a common name. They're all whoop-de-doo scientific names. Well, this is the rattlesnake plantain, Goodyear pubescens. And it is what we classify as a jewel orchid. Okay, these are orchids that you grow for the foliage as much or more than you do for the flowers. Okay, and it can be quite common in places. That trail that I took in the Smokies, if anyone's ever interested in, and you've got good legs, the Ramsey Cascade Trail. So 8 miles, but it's 8 miles like this. And all along in the forest there were giant patches of the rattlesnake plantain. Okay, it almost never blooms, but when it does, it blooms across the whole range. A climatic condition, I don't think in that case it's necessarily gypsy moths, but something about a particular year will induce it to bloom. But you can find it all over the habitats. The number of hands I saw tells you just how common this is. And it's one that it's not too cranky about growing in cultivation. We have several members of the society who grow it in cultivation and bring it to the orchid shows. Now, at the orchid shows, we have all sorts of categories for particular blooms so that, it's one group within itself that competes. Well, we have a category for jewel orchids where the only thing that's necessary is the foliage. And one of our members, Face Hitron, will bring the Goodyear pubescens. Now, there are many tropical jewel orchids as well from Asia, usually. And one of our science friends, Leon Glickenstein, has hybridized this with the Asian ones. And what it gets out of that is it gets this beautiful webbing, but the webbing is red. So, and it grows despite the fact that one of them is from Eastern North America and the other is from Indonesia. Okay, so the rattlesnake plantain, and this is one that used to be harvested in some quantities for people to put in berry bowls. Okay, berry bowls, if you're not familiar with it, they're a big round bowl which you can put a lid on top of it and keep it in a moist, kind of like a little terrarium. And it will persist for a long time. Some people have 20, 30 years. But that's the rattlesnake plantain, and you will find that in slightly acidic conditions, oak forests in particular. In these pictures that you'll see, you can look at the leaves around and you can see what it is. This is mostly oak leaves and some beech leaves here. So that's where you find it. And almost all of our state forests that have stands of mature oaks and beeches will have the rattlesnake plantain. This is the year they were in bloom. And again, you can look at the companion plants here. You've got the leaves down here and then these spikes of white. And they'll by the a couple weeks from there, they will all have seed pods that are maturing and they'll spread. But these are the sorts of colonies that are very common in places like the Catoctons and down in the Smoky Mountains. Okay. Some of you may have seen this one. This is the putty root orchid. Okay, the reason it's called putty root is the little tubers here, if you crush them, it makes kind of a gluey mix. The Native Americans would dig it up, crush them, and use it as a toothache remedy. But the putty root orchid does that. Now, one of the interesting things about the putty root orchid is that it produces its leaf not in the spring, but in the late fall, and that leaf is evergreen through the winter. So you can go in the woods in December, January, and you can see the leaves standing up there. This is what it looks like in late spring. The leaves are beginning to die down, and they will die down through the summer, and it'll be dormant during the summer. And these are the flower spikes. The taxonomists, bless their hearts, have studied it and determined that it falls in the same section of the orchid family as the Cymbidiums, the ones that are the corsage orchids. And so in theory, you could hybridize this with a Cypripedium. Now, it may be one of those cases where just because you could do it doesn't mean you should do it, but you know, they're beautiful flowers up close. And you're looking at a flower about the size of my small fingernail, but you know, very beautiful up close. And you see here an aphid. I don't think the aphids pollinate them. It's probably some sort of a bee or a wasp. The other evergreen orchid we have is the cranefly orchid. And if you do a lot of tromping around the woods and everything, you've probably seen both the putty root and the cranefly orchid. They're not rare. And these ones are fairly easy to grow. I've had the putty root orchid now in my wildflower garden for a little over 10 years, and it's happy. It actually, you know, unlike the pink lace zipper, it likes fertilizer. So give it a little bit of, you know, bulb tone, and it really does well, and it blooms almost every year. The cranefly orchid, very similar. One of the cool things about the cranefly is that it has the purple spots on the top and then this very purple underlayer. You'll find a lot of deep forest orchids have purple on the underside of the leaves. That apparently reflects light up into the layer where the chlorophyll is to give them an extra boost of sunlight. But there's the cranefly orchid. You can see why it gets its name. It looks like little crane flies flying there. Again, that trail in Smoky Mountains, there were thousands of them in bloom in August when I took that trail. A relatively easy one to grow. You have several nurseries here in Maryland who propagate it and offer it. There's a patch of them in the woods so you can see what happens. Both the putty root and the cranefly orchid grow in fairly deep shade. Now, one of the things that they noticed about the putty root orchid one time is that it seemed to line up. It would be lines of them through the forests. And then things, how do they do that? They think, what is it like? Maybe it does rhizomes or something. No, that's not what happens. What it eventually figured out was this is where a tree had fallen. And the tree began decomposing. And once the tree had gotten into an advanced state of composting, that's when the orchids would sprout on there. And so by the time they were blooming and everything, the tree had vanished from there, and all you had was the line where it had been. So, okay, this is one of my favorite here. This is a Liparis. It has a common name, twayblade. There's a lot of things that are called twayblades. But this is a plant about this tall, very cute little fan shape there, kind of a fleshy purple, brown color to them, fairly easy to grow. I found thousands of these up in Michaud State Forest up in Pennsylvania. And when I was starting my exploring it there, I found them out in the woods, and there'd be one or two here, one or two there, and everything, till I came to the edge of the lake that they have there in Michaud State Forest. And in the boggy areas along the lake, there were thousands of them. Okay, real close packed in there, and every one of them was in bloom and every one of them was setting seed. So this is another one that can survive deep in the forest, but would prefer to be out in the open and likes the wet ones. And I have some of these now in my bog garden where they have gone for many years now, and they like it. Okay, now we're getting into some of the more esoteric ones. These are the ones that you really have to be dedicated to appreciate them or even to find them. Okay, this is a Malaxis. It produces these spikes of flowers there with a single leaf and everything. The thing is, this is an illustration from a botanical magazine. The plant itself is only this tall. So we're talking about small things. You'll find these deep in the forest, and you really have to know what you're looking for to see them, because they look just like weeds to most people and everything. But there they are. And this is, one of the species in Maryland. But again, you would find it probably in our state forests in the older growths. This is another Lipris. This is Lipris lewisi, which has plant about this tall, same genus as that the brown fan lip one, but more robust. This is one I really want to see sometime. I have never actually seen it in the wild, I don't think. Okay, this is the world begonia, and it's called world because it has this whirl of leaves that comes up like that. It has exactly the same presentation as Indian cucumber, which is a very, 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 very common wildflower. And I've gone out at various seasons to look and see if I could find it. It's supposedly not uncommon. You've seen it? It's in green, okay. But somehow I've missed it after all these years. Now, I'm not aware of anyone who's cultivating this one. It's fairly common, and maybe like the pink lady slipper, you just have to give it what it really wants. But it's fascinating. I mean, look at those sepals and the petals and everything. It's fascinating. Now, part of what I say is, learning how to do it. Here's a picture of the pink lady slipper, which we know how to grow, and the world begonia right next to it in habitat. So, okay. Someday, maybe we'll figure out how to do that one. Now, it's not rare. It's, none of these are common, but it's not rare. This one is rare. This is the lesser world begonia, and it is the rarest North American orchid of any note. There are only a few dozen sites known of it, only a few thousand plants total. This is not one that's going to make for spectacular show plants, but it is fascinating and it's cool. But I know that this conservation center is learning how it associates with the funguses necessary to get it to germinate and to grow. They have actually gotten fungus associated packets of it to form protocorms, the beginning of it, but they've not sprouted. So we're learning, and hopefully I'm planning to live to 120. So we've got time to get this figured out before I go. And by that time, maybe I can live even longer. It's the world begonia, Isoltria medialoides. Medialoides means like cucumber, because the foliage looks like the Indian cucumber. So world begonia, and it's exceedingly rare, but maybe not quite as rare as we thought, but still it's one that it's definitely endangered. So, okay, now everything I've shown you so far is what we would generally agree with is a native orchid. Okay, now the thing is, all orchids are aliens. Okay, it's just how far back do we go? The lady slippers, as best we can tell, began in Southeast Asia and eventually spread all around the world. So they're an introduced species. It's just they were introduced, 100,000 years ago, before there were humans. Well, this is a recent alien, and this is not an invasive alien. I don't think we would call it invasive alien. Some people might. Okay, this is Helberine. And it is a species from Europe. It came in with some nursery stock, and it found a liking to North America, and it now lives all the way from New England out to California. There's a colony of them in just north of Sausalito out on the peninsula above San Francisco. It's somewhat attractive, and it grows about this tall. And it hates to be transplanted. Okay, it may sprout all over your garden from seed, but if you try to transplant it, it won't do it. So it's a peculiar one. I have seen specimens of this in Bald Eagle State Forest up in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has some glorious state forests if you want to go see native orchids and ferns. But the Helberine has a tall plant, and it produces a lot of seed. Now, okay, does that mean that there's the same European insect here that pollinates? No, actually not. It self-pollinates, so it doesn't even need any insects to do it. And all of those flowers will form seed pods with lots of seeds in them, and the seeds they'll germinate in the garden. I've never heard of it being so aggressive that it would displace other plants, but it would have to be considered a recent alien rather than an ancient alien. Okay, now if you venture deep into the woods and you really got good eyes, you will find all sorts of tiny treasures. I mean, this is Listera, not Listeria, Listera. And it's another one of the tway blades, and its flowers get pollinated by fungus gnats, little teeny tiny insects and everything. You can tell how small it is. These are moss sprigs down here and everything. So you're talking about plants that are only this tall. The photographer here really did a good job. And flowers can be quite attractive, but small. I'm not aware of anyone ever attempting to cultivate these. I don't know that they would be difficult. It's just no one's tried. It comes down to the why, I guess, for gardeners. But if you're an orchid growing is not for the sane. Okay, we will do amazing, crazy things for our orchids and everything. So I would think that if someone really got going on wanting to grow these, they could. Okay, this is a strange one here. This is a coral root orchid. Okay, it's not uncommon. It never ever produces leaves. It has no chlorophyll. It lives entirely in association with funguses on decaying matter. The name coral root comes from the shape of the roots. It looks like a branching coral, and that is the host for the funguses that will reach out into the surrounding area for the decaying matter and bring in the nutrient to do it. This is spotted coral root, Coralrhiza maculata, and it blooms in late summer, autumn. And see, when it blooms, that's the only time you're ever going to see it. There's nothing above ground except when it blooms. When it comes up here, it has appropriate pollinators, it makes its seeds distributed, seeds go out, they find the right place with the right fungus, and you get more coral roots. Now, they have been grown in cultivation, okay? Not with funguses or anything, but they took the seed and they did it under tissue culture conditions, under sterile conditions on a nutrient auger, and they were able to get it to grow and bloom in cultivation, sort of. I can imagine bringing them to like an orchid show to exhibit, and you'd have to bring it in the flask and all. But you'll find these if you're really looking for them. Okay. We're coming to the last one of my favorites here. This is the three-bird orchid, Trifora trianthera, which means three flowers. And it is the cutest little thing here. The whole plant is about this tall, so that you're talking about tiny flowers in there, but they're bright white in a deep, dark woodland. And they have tiny leaves, far too small to actually support the plant, so they're at least partially saprophytic. But the flowers are very attractive, and you've got texture on them. You've got the little knobs, and you got the pink. And it's just very pretty, and they grow in clusters like that. See the tiny leaves on there. When I lived in Western Kentucky, we were visiting one of the local landmarks, and I found a little colony of them deep in the shadow of this great big rock structure and everything, and got pictures of it, and came back 2 years later, and someone had built a campfire over it. So they were gone. It is not uncommon. It's just hard to find, and it's not going to have much in the way of growth until it's ready to bloom. But that's one that, as far as I know, has never been cultivated. And that, I think, is it. I appreciate your all's attention. And again, you are invited to Maryland Orchid Society meetings. We're open to all. Membership has its benefits, but everyone is free to attend all the time. And again, if you want to see a lot of pink lady slippers, this, by the way, my sister-in-law, this was one of her barn panels that she painted for me for the pink lady slipper in Western Kentucky. The illustrations we have around the classroom here include all of these different pictures. These are wild orchids of North America, from Florida out to California, up to the Arctic and everything else like that. About a quarter of the ones on this illustration can be found in Maryland. This is a variety of bog orchids. You have your fringed orchids here, and here you have all of the lady slippers of North America here.
I want to introduce our artist for the center picture there.
All right.
Hi, my name is Erin Vance. I grew up here. I spent the last year in California doing a science illustration grad program, and I recently finished the Tipularia discolor botanical piece.
All right. Tipularia is a cool thing.
It is, and it's our most common one, so I wanted to
Yeah.
start there. My first botanical plate. I've done plants, but not like a laid out piece before.
Okay. We in the orchid community, we have relied so much on the artists over the past 200 years to get the information out, because they occur in such wide variety and everything. I've been growing orchids for a third of the time they've been in cultivation, so I've really come to appreciate them. And some of the illustrations are just magnificent.
Any questions?
Thank you. That was very fun. So I've wondered about the when you find just the tipularia, for example, out in the wild, you often find a cluster
Yes.
of them. Is each leaf an individual plant, or is that a colony of a single plant? Like, what's going on underground?
In the case of Tipularia, each leaf is probably an individual plant. Their rhizomes and their string of bulbs don't branch usually. Now, that being said, it may go out for 3 or 4 bulbs, and if you were to clip it, probably the older bulbs, which we call back bulbs, they might sprout anew as well. That's one of the ways that we propagate others. Now, that applies to the Tipularia, the cranefly orchid, and the putty root orchid. In the case of the Cypripediums, they do clump up. My Cypripediums in the garden, the yellow lady slipper, will double about every other year from sprouts, and their rhizomes branch. So one of the things about orchid growers, when you start asking them questions, you'll almost always have an answer that starts with, "It depends." because, there's so many of them. There are 30,000 species of orchids in the world, depending on which taxonomist you follow, and 500,000 hybrids. So we get a lot of variety. And some of them clump, some of them don't.
Lovely talk, Clark. You didn't mention Arethusa. Is Arethusa in Maryland?
I have not heard of any records of Arethusa. Arethusa is the dragon mouth orchid, and it's a single bulb with this very beautiful pink flower that comes up on the top of it. It grows in live sphagnum, and each growth is elevated a little bit over the last one so that it can keep up with the growing sphagnum. The closest I know of a native population of the Arethusa is in the pine barrens of New Jersey.
Yeah.
That's as far north. When we had that conference where Doug was one of the presenters, we had Bobby Annetti, who had figured out how to grow them in cultivation, and he was propagating hundreds of the Arethusa, and he had made special pots that they could keep growing up year after year, and the sphagnum, the live sphagnum that he was growing would keep up with the orchid. And I have I have a variation of this talk I give up in places like New York, where it is native, and in there's a picture of a flask of them that he was growing in tissue culture, and you can see these little beads out of space going up where it makes its growth.
It's in North Carolina and it's in Pine Barrens, New Jersey. So I thought it must be here.
Well, we haven't seen it yet. That doesn't mean it's not here. It's up in the cranberry bogs up in western Maryland, maybe, possibly there's one. The habitat's right. The temperature's not too far off. I just haven't seen any reports of it.
We do have a question actually that just came in. Are there any North American orchids that have gone extinct recently?
As far as I know, none have gone extinct. Some of them are extinct in the wild, as far as we know, and not even extinct in the wild. Some of them very, very, very rare. Some of them have just been discovered, and maybe there's so few of them that they won't stay around for very long. But for instance, the purple fringed orchid, which I mentioned, there are records of it from Maryland, but they were all plundered. And so in Maryland, it is extinct. But if you go down the Blue Ridge National Park, you'll find the purple fringed orchid. Yes. We have a bog trotter here. This is good.
I only know of a couple. I know you mentioned in Catoctin. There's a couple wildlife. I don't want to say like location.
Right.
No, there's a wildlife management areas within Montgomery County that have a couple of individuals. Well, I mean, a couple, like 3.
In Montgomery County. Okay,
Montgomery
so that's
County,
good news. Okay. Now, the seed travels for miles and miles because it's in that it's like dust. And so, there may be some hiding out there. It's a big world out there. But it is listed on the Maryland Biodiversity site as extirpated in Maryland. It's fairly abundant in Pennsylvania and down in the Blue Ridges.
Or maybe waiting for those conditions to return.
Could be. Could be.
We have one that just came in. What about purple fringeless?
Purple fringeless, okay. Let's see, do I have it here? Yes. In the picture here, there's the purple fringed orchid, and there's a purple fringeless orchid, or the fan lip. Okay, and the purple fringed orchid likes kind of wet woodland areas, like on the edge of woodlands and everything where it's wet. The fan lip or fringeless orchid likes drier conditions, open woods, oak, and beech. So it's there. I know that the Carnivorous Plant Nursery cultivates the purple fringed orchid. I don't know anyone who has grown the fan lipped. Perhaps the folks at Longwood who have a really good facilities there, they may well be growing it. We're still learning how these things grow. It's only been 40 years that we figured out how to grow the hardy lady slippers from seed. It's only been 40 years. I mean, we've been growing orchids for 250 years in cultivation. So they're relatively new information there. And these conferences that we hold, these symposiums, have gone a long way to getting people to be able to grow these things. In Europe, they're much more dedicated to the mass propagation, and the genus that used to be Orchis, the one that's the foundation type genus for the whole family, is now called Dactylorhiza. Some of the European growers sell them commercially and everything, and I have purchased them from the Europeans and everything, and they do grow well in my bulb garden. So I've got the European Dactylorhizas, and they grew well, but they figured out how to grow them. The Germans and the Dutch and the Belgians in particular are way ahead of us in propagating. Most of the hybrid lady slippers that are now in commerce come from Germany originally.
So we have a little bit of a discussion in the chat about Arethusa, and Carol says the Moco stand near me has been predated by deer. So
Yeah.
Bradley, I don't know if this is one of the same ones as you were talking about, but at least one of them is apparently gone.
Okay.
But we do also have some other people saying that there's some Arethusa in Augusta County in Virginia.
Okay. Cool.
And we have several people who are asking if there can be electronic copies of the handouts.
What I have is I can make available if people want it. It's just stuff that I've printed out. And it has my photos on it. So it's, I have rights to it. They can probably email me. I can provide that information as well. It's just naocc@si.edu
Okay.
as contact information.
You are
I have
very
one
patient.
more question.
There's always more than one question.
You haven't mentioned much about the relationship with the mycorrhizae.
And the reason is that it is not as well understood as we might like. Okay, it used to be that people thought there was a required relationship between the seeds and the funguses. And for some species, that is probably true. But for many species, it is probably not true. Okay, the finding of funguses with the more vigorous terrestrial orchids may be just coincidence. But we've got an expert here. Okay, if you want to start a good argument, this is you waited until the end.
Yeah, so Judy looked at me when she asked this question.
Yes, of course.
So I've spent the last 27 years studying the association between orchids and their mycorrhizal fungi.
Yes.
And I will tell you that 100% of the time across the board in natural environment, there will be a fungus associated with germination of orchid seeds.
Okay.
Now, that doesn't mean you can't fool it in the lab. That doesn't mean you can't. And that's the orchid seeds.
Mhm.
You can find adult orchids without fungus, but it doesn't happen for very long in nature.
Right. And one of the things that is certain is that if you encourage mycorrhiza in cultivation, they will do well. But that could be just because the fungus and the orchids like the same conditions. One thing with the pink lady slipper is it is almost absolutely essential that they be mulched with pine needles. Okay, oak leaves would probably work, but all the people who grow them successfully must have a pine needle mulch. Okay, no fertilizer, pine needle. So the fungus probably is essential for the pink lady slipper all the way through also. And
there's
others.
also a bunch of the fungi that the orchids need that themselves are dependent on particular trees.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to have the tree, to have the fungus, to have the orchid, and it all gets very complicated.
This is like one of those songs. There's a hole in the bucket.
So I'll make a comment, being a member of both the
Yes.
Maryland Orchid Society, which I love, and the Maryland Native Plant Society, which I love. Maybe what we need to do here, if we love cultivated orchids so much, is to be really good at protecting native orchids,
Yes.
because where would we be without them? that help?
Oh, yes.
And I'm not going to leave the issue of the mycorrhizae yet. When an orchid like the pink lady slipper
Mhm.
is not blooming, it's not often not even flowering if there's shade. It's underground, surviving, and it's living, in many cases, I believe, off the mycorrhizae. And it can stay underground, living off the mycorrhizae for 20 years or more.
Well, we actually have someone who's going to say definitively. He knows.
Yes, I'm Doug Gill, and I've been studying pink lady slipper orchids in the wild for 48 years. We have over 6,500 that I've been following religiously. My longest underground survival is 24 years, and that was on the occasion of a pine trees falling over my marked plants, and I religiously went every year, and they're still under the log, and but finally the log did rot simply, and up through the log came big, robust, and some flowering, where they had not been visible for 24 years. And I pulled the log apart, and sure enough, they were my marked plants from a quarter of a century ago, number 2305 and number 2308. So yes, they can survive underground for decades with no photosynthesis, no green leaves, and come up big and robust after all that period of time. So yes, they have survived there. Their nutrient source had to be entirely from the mycorrhizal fungi, enough to make them big, robust, and flower after all those years. Yeah.
Another characteristic besides insanity of orchid growers is patience.
And I also want to, at this point, really make a plug for, and this is probably speaking to the choir here, don't disturb the orchids that are growing wild. They are really under threat. Some of them, as Clark was saying, are more common, but a lot of them, you really don't want to touch them. You don't want to disturb them. If you dig them up, they're likely to die. They won't have the conditions that you want. And they're so beautiful where they are. So please leave them where you find them.
The exception being when you've got construction going through, like a roadbed. There are certified organizations, for instance, up in Michigan, who will do rescues when road crews are coming through. And they
That's a
know
good
how to retrieve them in a way that they will grow.
Are there any other questions? Any online?
Nothing else in the chat, but lots of people saying fascinating presentation.
There's one more here.
Saint-Tropez.
You mentioned an orchid that has a seed that doesn't, it won't have food in it, and it tends to grow in bog areas. Do you remember that?
The grass pink, the grass pink seeds, they can just fall on sand and they will grow. And one of the contrarian scientists, Warren Stoudemire, was pretty well convinced that they grew on their own, because when you land in a boggy area, you're not worried about water and everything, and the seed will turn green just in there.
Is that a common, or is that seen in other plants that will grow in nutrient poor or other areas where there aren't a lot of plants?
Well,
grow slowly.
A lot of plants adapt to the nutrient poor areas because they don't have much competition. That's why you have pitcher plants and sundews and Venus flytraps, because they will capture their own food, and so they can live in a very, very nutrient poor boggy areas, sandy, wet, almost nutrient. And orchids will do that. Some maybe, possibly, maybe, probably with fungus associations. But yeah, orchids can live in areas where the competition is starved out.
I have another question. Okay, so you showed all these different orchids, fringed and single bulb, and one of them was like red all over, like red stem. Are there any common ways or common features you can just be able to look at a plant and be like, that's an orchid?
Yes, and it's kind of disappointing. Okay, what is common to all orchids that is not common to any other plant family is that in the flower, the reproductive parts are on a column that has the male and the female part together. That's it. That's all that defines an orchid. All 30,000 orchids, 30,000 orchid species have that in common, and no other plant family does that.
Thanks.
Told you it'd be disappointing.
And David, I see that there are a couple of comments in the chat.
Yeah, so we have folks talking about wild orchids, and one person, Dave, says it's best practice not to provide detailed geographic information for any you find in iNaturalist. That way people can't go dig them up. And then Carol says there are numerous nurseries where terrestrial orchids are available. Natural stands do not need to be disturbed.
Right. Right. In the US, we have 6 really, really good nurseries that I'm aware of that do nursery propagated from seed. And I can provide that information if anyone is interested. And, you know, their plants are all grown from seed. No native plants were touched other than the original collection.
Well, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Very interesting talk.